she would call me just to visit. And she called one day and we were talking. She said, Kathy, why are you always so happy, so joyful? And I said, well, Jesus. And she said, don't give me that Jesus stuff. You know, she didn't want to hear it. So, you know, she passed away yesterday. And this makes me kind of sad, you know, that she, and I haven't talked to her for about a year because I haven't been at the bank, but I'm just really doubting that she ever accepted Christ. We can give the word, but we can't make them accept it.
Well, and you can be confident that she was hearing from the Lord too, because she was that insistent on not hearing, she was hearing it.
I got a phrase. There's a lot of people that I take care of, and, you know, if they're sick or going through stuff, I tell them, you know, hey, you know, I'll have you in my prayers. And I always make sure I like touch their shoulder or something because it just seems more meaningful. One of the other workers was walking a lady doing her 6-minute walk, and she said, you're the one that said you were going to pray for me, and I know you did because I got better. It was just, you know, that is just amazing.
Good. Anybody else? Okay, we are on Proverbs 31 tonight. We're going to finish it up. It's been 37 weeks. Been more than that because we missed a couple Wednesdays, but 37th one is tonight, and I'm going to sneeze. Sorry. Maybe not. Anyway. Being a musician is an interesting thing because very few people ever achieve true mastery of an instrument where they are truly at the top of their game. I certainly have not, and I never will, but I do want to get better. And so in an effort to get better, work on skills, things like that, I get books, I do this, I do that. And sometimes it involves YouTube. And so, you know, it's kind of surprising. It's surprising to me that any of us have private students at all anymore, because so many people go to YouTube to learn things. But I'm thankful I still do have private students. But I go to YouTube sometimes and I see these videos, and I can't tell you how many times I see a video, and I'm going to watch this guy, whether it's bass or guitar, and, you know, for some inspiration. But then I watch the thing, and then I want to just like, okay, turn it off, go gather up all my stuff, throw it in the dumpster. I'm done. That's it. And I say that because having arrived at Proverbs 31, and the part that many of us are familiar with, might inspire similar feelings tonight. We're starting in verse 10, and there's a 3-part outline, very simple. Verses 10 and 11 is the wife's value. The wife's value. 12 through 27, the wife's skills. And 28 through 31, the wife's worth. So worth, value, skills, worth. 10 and 11, 12 through 27, 28 through 31. Okay, so we've learned, we've seen many times over that Proverbs is poetry. And I think a lot of times when we say that, it maybe doesn't resonate, because for many of us, our default understanding of poetry is that it has to rhyme. I learned recently that that's actually an influence of Norman French on English. Because in Old English, Anglo-Saxon poetry, for example, Old English doesn't rhyme. What they do, it's more about alliteration. So like you have a series of four funny foxes. That's alliteration. The same consonant at the beginning. Which, when you think about it, is like the opposite of rhyming. Rhyming, you have the ending of words that match. And alliteration, you have the beginning of the words that match. So there's different kinds of poetry. And so the fact that it doesn't rhyme, that's what makes it hard. If you think about when you were in school and you're going to do the unit on poetry, and you're like, okay, it's going to be like greeting cards, and it's nothing like that. Maybe you loved it. For a lot of people, me included, though I had to take one language arts literature kind of class at college, and so I ended up taking a poetry class. What I remember about it is that I turned in a paper one time, and on the front page I said to Professor so-and-so, not to, but presented to Professor so-and-so, and then I got it back marked in red, marked out, Dr. so-and-so. Like, I wanted to say, lady, you just lost all credibility. You got to say that, but anyway, okay. Anyway, so another factor of why this doesn't resonate to us as poetry is because it's not in its original language. And when you translate to a different language, whatever it was before, it's like all bets are off. Yeah. I mean, it might have rhymed in the original. I don't know that was a thing with them, but regardless, it doesn't work that way. Also, speaking of translation, I learned that in most English translations of this passage, all of the verbs are in present tense. The wife does this, the wife does that. In the original, it's all past tense. All right? And then one last thing along the poetic line. This poem is an acrostic. So in English, we don't see it. But in Hebrew, every 2 lines starts with the next letter of the alphabet, of which there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, thus 22 verses there. But again, your translation does not reflect that. Okay? So, thinking of this Proverbs 31 thing, how many times have we heard this passage read on Mother's Day? Or you read it on a Mother's Day card? Or you saw some version of it on a little plaque, or a mug, or a t-shirt, or whatever. This poem is actually doing more than laying out a blueprint for Christian women. That should make you Christian women glad. What it is doing, it's really wrapping up the book of Proverbs by calling back to things that we've seen throughout the book. In the first part of the book, we saw wisdom portrayed as a woman. So now, at the end, here is a portrayal of a woman of wisdom. Earlier, wisdom was in the role of providing insight and instruction to sages and leaders, people in the court. And here, wisdom is giving instruction to women and men regarding not royal responsibilities, but like daily activities. So the wisdom that was important for leaders as they led a group of people, a country, a city, now it's coming down to the level that we can all relate to. Now I said women and men. It doesn't ever say men, but if it's in the Bible, you can learn from it. It doesn't have to, even though this is talking directly about a woman, we can all learn from it. This poem sort of provides a concrete example of wisdom in the form of this virtuous wife. Wisdom is necessary both in the inner workings of the palace and in the home. If there's a lot of wisdom in the home, then that's going to carry out into the society at large, at least if there's a lot of wisdom in a lot of homes. If there's wisdom in government, but not in the home, that home's going to suffer. If there's wisdom in the home and not much in government, they're going to suffer. Okay, so we benefit from wisdom in all of those areas. In chapter 1, wisdom promised that if we would turn at my rebuke, surely I will pour out my spirit on you. I'll make my words known to you. And so here at the end of the book, we're given an example of what that might look like. What it looks like if we turn at wisdom's rebuke. When we read verse 1, or not verse 1, but verse 10, where it says, a virtuous woman, who can find? Well, we're not supposed to answer no one. It's not like one of those questions. We're supposed to realize that it's a quest worth undertaking. So let's actually, I didn't read the two verses that we're going to look at first. So verse 10, who can find a virtuous wife? For her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. So we have this example. We're supposed to realize that finding a virtuous wife or husband is a quest worth undertaking. That virtue itself is a quality that's so important that the lack of it, now none of us are in this situation where we're looking for a life's partner. But you rewind the tape. A lack of virtue is enough to be a disqualification. That's like, no, that's just okay, we come to that and we find that out, then we're like, yeah, that's a deal breaker. So we're trying to find someone that has this virtue. Knowing that a wife can be trusted is essential to a stable home. Many of the verses in the poem, again, can equally apply to both partners in a marriage. Yesterday, Rachel had to go to Springfield, going to the dentist, and she was getting all ready to go. I don't know why she got all fixed up to go to the dentist, but she did. Because she does. She always does. She cares what she looks like. So she got all fixed up. She was especially happy with that outfit. And a big smile on her face. And she's like, okay, I'm ready to go. I think this looks pretty good. And I said, yeah, it does. And then I said something that I often say in such cases, don't take up with any strange men. To which she replied that she had all the strange men she could handle. That's a little joke of ours, not that second part. That was a new part. But it's based on the reality that I know I can trust her. And knowing that I can trust her is a great comfort to me. I mentioned watching the YouTube videos and sometimes feeling like throwing my guitar or my bass in the trash. Well, get ready, ladies, because this part of the poem might be that for you. You just take some comfort that it is a poem, not a detailed description of one person. So this next part where it starts all the skills, that's what we're talking about. The alphabetical part of this, which again we don't really notice, the alphabetical aspect forced the poet to address some subjects and ignore others so that it would fit in this alphabet thing. They set themselves a limit at the beginning that the first verse is going to be an aleph, our equivalent of A. The next one's going to be bet, and then so on. It's going to fit that. So you had, just like if you were doing the same, if you were going to write a book and it was going to be A is for whatever, you would have to follow that. Once you'd gone down that road, you're just kind of locked in. So there's some things that get talked about and some things that come back. And I think that's part of why. I want to read to you a statement that John Goldingay was one of the commentators I read during this time. What he said about this poem. Taken as representing the ideal wife, or the kind of person to look for as a wife, or to emulate, her portrait has seemed both liberating and oppressive. But the poem gives no hint that she is set forward to such ends any more than do the stories of Abigail, Esther, or Ruth. Its presence at the end of Proverbs does bring the book to a close with an imaginative account of someone who embodies much of the character ideal that the book has set forward. Okay, so in other words, if you set a lofty goal for yourself, you might end up not quite hitting the target, but you will achieve far more by setting a lofty goal for yourself and not quite reaching it than if you set a really easy goal for yourself. So whatever the task is, there's kind of a sweet spot of goal setting. If you set a minuscule goal, you might achieve it, but it won't be any big deal. You can also set a goal that's unrealistic in any sense, and that's just a discouragement. But I'm talking about just a goal that's just, there's a good chance you're not going to make it, but reaching for that goal drags me higher than I would have otherwise. And so that's what's going on here, I think, at least partially. One last thing before we look at each verse in turn. In the New Testament, there was a time when a teacher of the law asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" The story that Jesus told is really memorable. It's one of the most famous stories in the world, the Good Samaritan, but probably a little unlikely to happen just like that in the life of anybody that heard it, or in yours or mine. Probably a little unlikely that it would work out that way. Even so, it perfectly illustrates the concept that Jesus was trying to get across. So here, it's as though, having worked all the way through the book of Proverbs, we might ask, so what would wisdom look like in the home? And we get this passage. So it's another story of sorts, maybe unlikely to be replicated exactly like this in your life, but is there as a lofty goal. So verses 12 through 27, actually just going to look at 12 through 14 to start with. So it's already talking about a virtuous wife. Obviously it implies a husband, so have that in mind. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. She's like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. Okay, so just a real quick poll. Ladies, how many of you worked with wool or flax today? No. How long has it been since you worked with wool or flax? It's been a while, okay. All right, so anyway, this is telling us that this wise woman is a keeper at home. I don't mean she's kept at home. She is a keeper at home, and what I mean is the home is her thing, not her only thing, but the home is her venue to minister in. And she's industrious in that arena of responsibility, which ends up being a perfect foil for the husband being that elsewhere. She tends to the clothing needs of her household. That's the connection you can make, since not only have you not worked with wool and flax today, probably nobody you know has, but it is talking about the clothing needs of the household. In this case, she's actually making the thread and the yarn that then she will use to make the fabric that then she will use to make the clothes. How many of you ladies have made clothes before for you or your family? See, more of you have done that. Okay, so you're getting closer. It's okay if you haven't. I'm guessing even those of you that haven't made your own, you have attended to the clothing needs of your household in some way or other. This wise woman also tends to the food needs of her household. Probably most of you have spent most of your lives in situations where the wife is the main cook. I know I have. It's not to say that the husband doesn't cook. I cook with regularity. I don't cook as often, but I do cook with regularity. I didn't know when I took up with Rachel that she was a good cook. I don't think she knew she was a good cook at that point. I didn't start dating her because I thought she might be a good cook. There were other considerations. That wasn't one. But she is a good cook. She is a far better cook than my mother ever was. And she is a vastly better cook than her mother ever was. All those things are true. I have been greatly benefited of that. And part of the reason that she gained that skill came from kind of a duality of wanting her kids to have healthier food coupled with the need to be frugal, because it was me and a teacher's salary and all of them. So I'm going to share a story with you here. I'm going to brag on Rachel a little bit. And whether she wants me to or not, I'm going to. Because I remember this so clearly, and I just love it. So during my 38 years of teaching, always worked with a majority of women. Always. That's just the way it is in education. In high school, there's more men, but there's not more men than women. There's just more men than there are, say, in the junior high or the elementary. Far more women in education than men. It's actually part of the problem with education. Not because women can't teach, just because there's not a balance. Okay? But anyway, so once here at the junior high, I was sitting in the teacher's lounge with some ladies, because that's who's the teachers, and they were talking about food. And I was listening, and they started talking about breakfast and waffles in particular. And I'm just listening, and they started talking about frozen waffles and which ones were the best. And they were telling me, oh, I like this one, oh, those are good, and on and on and on it went. And then I guess at some point they realized I hadn't said anything. And so at this one point, one of the ladies turns to me and said, I bet Rachel doesn't use frozen waffles, does she? And I smiled and I said, no. And she said, well, does she use a mix or make them from scratch? And I was happy to tell them that she made the waffles from scratch after she had ground the wheat for the flour for the waffles. Which is true. And they were like, what? And I said, yes, we buy 50-pound bags of wheat, berries, and she grinds it for the flour. And so then none of them questioned whether I was telling the truth, because they knew me by this time. Anyway, but one of them said, I wish I had a Rachel. So anyway, no, I'm just going to tell you, she doesn't do that anymore, because I don't eat bread hardly ever. So anyway, verse 15. She also, okay, brace yourself. So if we're going to keep score personally, I just told you, Rachel's actually doing pretty good, but this is where it all comes to a crashing halt. She also rises while it is yet night. Not quite. And provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. She considers a field and buys it. From her profits, she plants a vineyard. As a statement of an ideal woman, there'll be places where you fall short, and this might be it. I didn't mention at the beginning that the commentators will say that the woman being described is in some translations will have it, a noble wife. They mean noble as refers to status, not character. So in the same sense that, we tell some little boy, you need to act like a gentleman. Some people still say such things. Okay, you go back 800 years, a gentleman might have been the worst behaved person ever. It wasn't because of their behavior, it was because of their status. They were nobility. So this is a woman of the nobility. She is wealthy. She has a household to manage. You might think of like Abigail in 2 Samuel. I think it's 2 Samuel. It's either that or 1, but I think it's 2 Samuel. It is, guaranteed. Abigail, she's running a household, or as a negative example, but still kind of the same thing, Potiphar's wife would be like this. She's got a household to run there. It's not just her and her husband, their servants and the whole bit. So the woman that we're talking about here, she's up and getting the food ready, not just for her family members, but for the help as well. She is also a decision maker in the business aspects of the house. She considers a field, which implies that she has the wisdom to know if it's a good buy or not. She plants a vineyard. In other words, she's thinking ahead and planning for the future. And I think that, like, again, I'm not going to ask because you're not going to raise your hand anyway. Nobody here ever has, I'm guessing, has planted a vineyard. I'm not saying you haven't planted some plants, but a vineyard, But you've done other things that are the same sort of, I'm going to do this now because I'm looking way into the future. Because planting, zucchini seeds, that is future, but it's not that far in the future. They're going to be ready soon. Planting a vineyard, it's a while before it's going to happen. It might be akin to planting a stand of walnut trees because someday you're going to sell them. Well, that's way in the future. So she's looking ahead. She is thinking about planning for the future. She doesn't want those in her care to be caught without. Verse 17, she girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. She perceives that her merchandise is good and her lamp does not go out at night or go out by night. So, she girds herself with strength. Maybe she goes to the gym. I don't know. But the part about the lamp, her lamp doesn't go out at night because she's working long hours, is the implication. Now, when I was looking at this and thinking about this, I was reminded of my mother. My mother, I already told you, the cooking part, she cooked for us. Obviously, I survived. But it was just, she would have told you Rachel was a better cook. She just cooked. We just survived. But here's where Mom kicks into this part of it. This working long hours. When the Dairy Queen was going, she would be at the Dairy Queen in the morning at 8:30, right about. She worked until about 1. Everybody had their lunch break. About 1, she came home, and she was home until about 4 when she was back over there. During that 1 to 4 time, she was either doing housework that needed to be done or she was doing the bookkeeping for the Dairy Queen. So she'd go back over there about 4. Dairy Queen closed at 11 that night. She was there till after 11. By the time we got home, it was about 11:30. Then we sit at the table and count the money and get the deposit ready for the thing. And then go to bed and the next day when it happened again. That was all the time. Which is one of the reasons why I didn't want to run a Dairy Queen. But that's the way she did. Her lamp didn't go out by night because she was working. She was busy. Verse 19, she stretches out her hands to the distaff and her hand holds the spindle. Distaff and the spindle are tools for weaving. So again, with the flax and the wool and stuff. I found out that in ancient Near East literature and art, when they would represent noble women or queens, they're often pictured holding a spindle. I didn't know that, but that's what I read. Verse 20, she extends her hand to the poor. Yes, she reaches out her hands to the needy. Last week, we talked about the king's responsibility to look out for the poor and those who were powerless. And so here, too, the wife is generous and sympathetic. She is not above helping those in need. In fact, she is actively doing that. How does she do this? How does she extend her hand to the poor? Well, the same way that many of you have done this. She might help with clothing needs. She might help fix them a meal when the mother is indisposed, or they've had a death in the family, or somebody's in the hospital, whatever. Her wisdom allows her to see and perceive needs and then to fill those needs. And in some ways, I think that is an especial gift that ladies have. Because generally speaking, if anybody that ever received that sort of care from our household, it was because she thought of it. Because I'm for it. I just didn't think of it. And I think that sometimes ladies have that kind of radar that we don't. Okay, verse 21. She's not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. She makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. Now, you might notice that some of these themes aren't grouped together. So like we're back to clothing and we're back to, the clothing part. And we'd already talked about that earlier, but I think that's because, again, of the alphabet and having to force things into the letters that are available to them. I think that's why it kind of jumps around. So we see here reasoning for why the commentators say that the lady is a noble woman of the nobility. She's wearing fine linen and purple. Purple was not just another color choice in the days of the Bible, because to dye something purple was not easy. And so like Lydia, for example, in the book of Acts, is a seller of purple. She had a market to people, an upscale market, because that's who could afford that stuff. So that's why this lady we think that she would be a noble woman. Her husband is known in the gates. So when we wonder about that or think about that, you think about the story again, we're going to go back to 2 Samuel, where David's son, Absalom, decides he's going to usurp the throne. He's going to steal the hearts of Israel away from his father. What does he do? He goes down to the gates and he sits there, because people come to the gates for like judgment. They come to the gates to hear the wisdom of the judges or the important people. And they would come and they'd tell him his story, and he'd say, boy, what'd be great is if I was king, I could help you with that. He's a good politician. He's just making these promises. The guy that's in office now is terrible. But let me help you, and it could be better. So that's why it says her husband's known in the gates, that he's one of these sort of influential people that is in the area. Verse 24, she makes linen garments and sells them and supplies sashes for the merchants. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. So when we talked about, the sage was talking about the wisdom, this is 2, 3, 4 sessions ago, the sage talked about the wisdom of the ant, because the ant prepared ahead of time for the coming hard times. So here's the human example. She'll rejoice in time to come because she has prepared for those times. She has food prepared and preserved. She knows, like we go back a little bit to verse 21, it says that she wasn't afraid of the snow. It doesn't snow that much in Israel, but it does get really cold. And so she had prepared her family for that because she had warm clothes for them. It says scarlet. I'm not sure what the significance of it is, but she had made warm clothes. She had prepared. She'd looked ahead. Verse 26, she opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. So verse 26 gives us instruction that I think can absolutely be done in the church today. that she shares wisdom. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. There's not a lot of benefit in having people around you that have walked a path that you will someday walk successfully if you don't ever hear from them. If they don't ever help you, you don't benefit from them. I've worked with people before who never wanted to ask questions. Don't want to know how anybody else does it. Which is why they didn't do it very well. Because there's wisdom in other people. Even if it's just confirmation of like, I find out, I had planned to do the thing this way, I ask and I find person after person that says the way I had thought I would do it is the way to do it. Then I'm just confirmed in my idea. But we need to share wisdom with one another. In Timothy, maybe, talks about the older ladies sharing with the younger ones. Titus, okay. We should do that. We should share wisdom with other people. Men too. Older men to the younger men. If they're available but we won't share, that's not good. And if the younger ones might not ask you, just offer. Now you might say, well, I don't know, because unasked for advice. I know. But unless you're just rude about it, I can't imagine it would be completely unappreciated. If they're not interested in receiving hard-earned wisdom, well, that's a mark of their foolishness. That just shows they needed it worse. But the wise person has something to share. A testimony, like we shared a couple of testimonies tonight. That's an example of that. But it could be other things too. Verse 27, this reminds you, after everything we've heard about the woman, that she's not lazy. Which is kind of like, okay, I guess that word fit into the acrostic, because nothing would have led you to believe the person that's been described so far was lazy, but there it is. Verse 28, her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. It could be that for some of you, Mother's Day might not be your favorite holiday. I understand, because your kids don't rise up and call you blessed. I understand. They almost certainly don't do it as often as they should. Almost without a doubt, that's true. That doesn't mean that they don't know that they were the recipient of blessing. Some people are grown up. They're grown up but kids, right? There are kids, but they're grown ups. Sometimes they're busy thinking about their deal and they don't share. They don't go back and say, I remember when you did this for us and that was just awesome. But they do remember. And they know. It's the same with your husband. Probably doesn't say it often enough, so gentlemen, don't let that be us. We need to make sure appreciation is offered. And that, again, we should be appreciative people in general. Most marriages that last are not predicated on good looks. Because for most people, good looks fade. Probably hard for us to understand because we're well preserved, but in most cases, they fade. I've been noticing more than ever, people that are my age, they're looking older. And I feel bad for them.
You ought to attend the 60th high school reunion.
I know. Yes. Well, my 40th college reunion is coming up, and I've been thinking about that. But following the ways of wisdom, whether a woman or a man, will make you an asset that just keeps accruing value as you age. I said what I wanted to say, but I didn't say it well. Following the ways of wisdom will make you an asset, will make you a woman or a man that keeps accruing value as you age. Learning God's ways as you age. Now, I know that I am not the sharpest guy around, but I am way better than I used to be. And I know that's true. Whatever mark I am in my ultimate development, I know I'm farther along than I used to be, which is good. And we want to gain ground. We want to be better off than we used to be. You know, every 4 years, we hear this question. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Well, that's a great question to answer in that context, but it's a question that we should ask ourselves. Am I better off now than I was a year ago? It's one thing that you should do at New Year's time. You can make a resolution that you may or may not keep, but you should ask that question. Spiritually speaking, am I farther along the road now than I was? And if the answer is no, that's a good time to stop and ask why. And ask the Lord, what? Clearly, it's not his fault. What can I do to see that the next year that shows up, I will be farther along? I'm like everybody else. I've made so many mistakes in my life. There's things I should have done and didn't, things I shouldn't have done and did, things that anybody else would have known was not going to work out, but I did anyway. Things that seemed like a good idea, but it just turned out not. But in spite of all that, because I have continually come back and been in a place where I feel like God could bless me, I am farther along. Could I have been farther? Probably. But since I can't go back and change that, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to keep moving ahead. And we should feel that way, that we are gaining wisdom. Throughout the book of Proverbs, especially in the beginning chapters, we saw that a lot of instruction was provided specifically at the time, prepared for those that were entering public service. But we learned then, and we remember now, that the lessons, they may have been prepared with other people in mind originally, but they're in our Bible, and so they're for us. And so when we read Proverbs 31, starting with verse 10, yeah, it's the Proverbs 31 woman, sure. But there's things I can learn from that. Not just because it's a woman. And for that matter, you might not be a wife. That's talking about a wife, but it's still stuff you can learn. The Bible's good like that. Most of us would like to think that we are learning wisdom. If you didn't care about it, you wouldn't come to church on a Wednesday night. I hope you don't come because you think I'm going to say something funny. I might. Or I might just be funny because I can't help it. I hope that's not why you come. I hope you come because you think that coming will get you closer to the Lord. That it's a grace in your life that he does for us. And that's why I come. I can't think of a good reason not to. And I can think of 1,000 good reasons to. And so we come. Most of us would like to think, I believe, that we are actually in pretty good shape when it comes to the common sense department. But if we follow God's ways as they are laid out in the book of Proverbs, well, then we can have uncommon sense. And that's what we are after. Let's have word prayer. Father, thank you for the time that we've spent in this book, that you've spoken to us through so many different ways. Lord, there's so much of it that is like drinking from a fire hose. It's just, there's so much, but we know that We don't have to learn it all at once. But we trust that you will keep us in your school, that you'll keep us learning wisdom, that you will help us to be farther along than we used to be, that you'll make us fit to be helpers for other people that are not as far down the road as we are. And we won't feel proud about that. We'll just know that others have helped us, and now it's our turn to step up. And I pray that you'd make our church that kind of a church where we're actually involved in each other's lives to that level that we can help one another. We ask that you would speak to us throughout the week, Lord, and be with the ones that we mentioned earlier, Lord. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Thanks.